Are the profound mysteries of near-death experiences actually just caused by a single molecule naturally found in our own brains? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a fascinating, highly debated topic that sits right at the crossroads of neuroscience, human consciousness, and mortality itself.
Look, across virtually every culture and century, people who skirt the very edge of death come back with strangely consistent stories. You know the ones, leaving the body, traveling through a dark tunnel toward a brilliant light, and feeling this overwhelming, profound peace. Well, for decades, one wild neuroscientific idea has totally captured the popular imagination. We're investigating the prime suspect behind these visions, the so-called spirit molecule.
The spirit molecule hypothesis. Let's trace where this fascinating, yet, spoiler alert, highly speculative idea actually started. Because to understand the science today, we have to look at how a psychedelic molecule got linked to the dying process in the first place.
Before we talk about death, we got to talk about the molecule itself. NN-DMT is not just some illicit drug. It's a molecule our own bodies actually produce. It's a naturally occurring psychedelic found in trace amounts in mammalian brains. And honestly, what's incredible here is that despite its insanely powerful effects, its normal physiological role inside our heads, genuinely unknown to science. It's a total mystery.
So the modern story kicks off at the University of New Mexico in the 1990s. Psychiatrist Rick Strassman ran the first legal human psychedelic research in the U.S. in decades. He gave about 400 intravenous doses of DMT to 60 volunteers, and these trials produced visions so vivid, with people reporting being catapulted into completely otherworldly realms, that Strassman officially coined the term spirit molecule in his 2001 book.
Strassman actually went a step further with a really bold proposition. He hypothesized that the pineal gland, that tiny little structure in the center of the brain, might flood our brains with DMT at pivotal moments like birth, deep mystical states, and, you guessed it, the exact moment of death. Now, to be fair, Strassman always labeled this clearly as speculation, but it was just such a poetic idea that it spread like wildfire into popular culture and hardened into this massive modern myth.
Section 2. Testing the resemblance. In 2018, researchers at Imperial College London finally put this striking resemblance to a rigorous test. For the longest time, the connection rested purely on anecdote. People just noticed, hey, DMT trips sound an awful lot like near-death experiences. But science demands hard data.
Which brings us to a really landmark study. Christopher Timmermann and his team at Imperial College gave IV DMT to 13 healthy volunteers. Their goal? To see exactly how these psychedelic experiences scored on the Grayson Near-Death Experience Scale. That's the standard medical questionnaire used worldwide to quantify real, naturally occurring NDEs.
And what's truly astonishing here? Every single one of those 13 volunteers crossed the threshold into a quantifiable near-death experience. The results were mind-blowing. Compared to a matched group of people who had survived actual brushes with death, the DMT experiences were statistically comparable on 15 out of the 16 features measured by the scale. Absolutely wild.
But if we look a little closer, the honest picture sharpens up. While DMT beautifully replicates the unity, the brilliant light, and the profound joy of an NDE, it clearly fails to produce the definitive point-of-no-return narrative that dying patients consistently report. It also produced way less of the classic life review and out-of-body separation. Basically, it reproduces the emotional color of the experience, but definitely not the full narrative arc.
So the crucial takeaway here is that while DMT statistically models the near-death experience, resembling something is absolutely not the same as causing it. The researchers were super careful with their wording. DMT models the experience. We can't just jump to the conclusion that because they look alike, one is actually responsible for the other.
Section 3. Released at death. If this molecule genuinely causes NDEs, we need a smoking gun. Is DMT actually released when we die? Let's look at what happens in the brain when the heart literally stops beating. The most relevant evidence we have right now comes from a 2019 study by Jimone Borgigian and her team at the University of Michigan. They confirmed that DMT is genuinely present in living rat brains. And more importantly, they found that DMT significantly surges in dying rats right after their hearts stop. Now, at first glance, this looks like the ultimate proof for the spirit molecule hypothesis, right?
Well, not so fast. Researchers strongly caution that it is entirely unknown if this surge happens in humans at all. On top of that, they have no idea if those trace levels in rats are anywhere near enough to trigger a massive psychedelic trip. Seeing a measurable rise in a rodent's brain is a very, very long way from proving a full-blown, brain-flooding psychedelic event in a dying human.
Section 4. The pineal gland myth. This brings us to a false alibi we really need to respectfully dismantle. The cinematic idea that our tiny pineal gland unleashes a literal torrent of DMT as we die. It's a beautiful image, right? The third eye opening at death. But we need to look at the cold, hard biological math.
Pharmacologist David Nichols laid this out perfectly. Your pineal gland produces about 30 micrograms of melatonin a day. But to get a psychedelic dose of DMT, you'd need around 25 milligrams. To put that into perspective, that's a 1,000-fold difference. It is simply mathematically impossible for the pineal gland to suddenly synthesize 1,000 times its daily output in mere seconds. It would have to miraculously manufacture all of this, and then that DMT would have to somehow survive the brain enzymes that normally destroy it instantly. Nichols literally called it simply impossible. And actually, even Dr. Strassman found no DMT when examining human pineal glands. The myth just doesn't add up.
Section 5. The dying brain lights up. Okay, so if it isn't a massive DMT flood from the pineal gland, what incredible fireworks are actually happening in the brain at the threshold of death? Because the dying brain doesn't just quietly fade to black.
A fascinating timeline of research shows that the dying brain experiences intense surges of gamma wave activity. In 2013, researchers found a surge of synchronized gamma waves in dying rats in the first 30 seconds after cardiac arrest. Then, in 2023, a remarkably similar gamma wave surge was observed in dying humans who were withdrawn from life support. Gamma waves are heavily linked to conscious information processing. This means the brain briefly lights up on its own, completely without needing DMT.
And because of this intense brain activity, we have to consider rival suspects. In fact, DMT is just one voice in a very crowded chorus. Elevated carbon dioxide levels are linked to intense NDEs. REM sleep intrusions into waking consciousness are super common in people who report near-death experiences. And then there's ketamine, a completely different molecule, which produces states that people rate as more similar to real NDEs than almost any other drug. All of these can reliably trigger NDE-like features.
Section 6. Resemblance is not mechanism. Let's pull all these clues together and land on our final scientific verdict. The story of DMT and near-death experiences really is one of careful neuroscience pushing back against a very popular romantic narrative. But hey, none of this means the connection is trivial. The fact that an IV infusion can model this profoundly moving experience in a lab is incredibly valuable. It gives scientists a safe, controllable, reproducible way to study the emotional texture of death without anyone actually having to die. It strongly suggests that these mystical landscapes are latent capacities waiting within all ordinary human brains. It's a shared architecture of consciousness.
What you should really take away from this is that the near-death experience is a magnificent, emergent phenomenon of a brain under extreme stress. It isn't just the fingerprint of a single molecule. It's likely shaped by oxygen loss, neurotransmitter storms, and the brain's own electrical surges. DMT is a fascinating piece of the puzzle for sure, but the resemblance is a clue, not a conclusion.
Which leaves us with a pretty wondrous final thought. If a single molecule doesn't fully explain the near-death experience, what other hidden capacities does the human mind hold just waiting to be discovered? We definitely don't have all the answers to what happens when we die, but the sheer complexity of what the brain is capable of producing on its own is nothing short of miraculous. Thanks for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and stay intensely curious about the mind.